All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And a special thank you to Northeastern University and the John D. O'Brien African American Institute for hosting us tonight, and to my sisters in service who have joined me for this historic Congressional Black Caucus fly-in here in the Massachusetts 7th. Specifically, CBC Chairwoman Karen Bass, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Moore, Congresswoman Watson Coleman, Congresswoman Hayes, who will join us tomorrow, and Congresswoman Omar. I thank them all for their activism, their sisterhood, and for their commitment to fighting for justice for the diaspora. Again, today is a historic day in Boston. I'm proud to announce that this weekend marks the first ever visit of the Congressional Black Caucus to the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. After a momentous swearing in of the most diverse city council in the history of Boston, the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District continues to make great strides in realizing leadership parity. I really do believe that the rise of Black leadership that is emerging in the 7th is a microcosm of the shift in representation we are seeing throughout our country. So it is very timely that the CBC would be here for a historic visit at a time when we have a Black woman as the president of our Boston City Council, and again, the most representative Boston City Council in the history of the body. When we have a Black female Suffolk County District Attorney, a Black sheriff, and also across the river, and a Black police commissioner. And across the river, also in the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District in Cambridge, we inaugurated the first Muslim woman mayor in all of Massachusetts. And this summer, Boston, which is home to the first chartered branch of the NAACP, the oldest and largest civil rights volunteer organization, Boston will be the host city for the NAACP's 111th annual national convention. So during these unprecedented times that we find ourselves in, they really do demand unprecedented leadership. At a time when Black people are disproportionately paid less and arrested more. Activism is not an option. It is a mandate. It is the expectation of the electorate, but moreover, it is the standard of the Congressional Black Caucus, which is often characterized as the conscience of the Congress. The CBC's role in combating hate, racial inequality, and civil injustice remains as important as ever as the caucus fights for the most vulnerable. Again, we are frequently referred to as the conscience of the Congress because we know that when the rest of America gets a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. Today, under the leadership of our fearless Chairwoman Karen Bass, the CBC is ushering in a new movement. A movement which reimagines equity and justice, a movement that centers the dignity and humanity of Black Americans, and I'm honored to be serving in Congress alongside these iconic table shakers and justice seekers who have dedicated their lives to doing the work, as my mother would say, with a capital W. We are redefining what representation looks like. It cannot be a government that's formed by the people if we are not represented by all of the people. And as I've often said, the best policies are data-driven, and the data are the lived experiences of the people. And so we are here to hear from them. Now, although the 7th is one of the most diverse, vibrant, and dynamic districts in the country, we also are one of the most unequal. From Cambridge to Roxbury, life expectancy drops by 30 years, and median household income by almost $50,000. Now, what is happening here in the Massachusetts 7th and the burden and the hurt disproportionately bore by Black Americans here is not an anomaly, which speaks to the historical and systemically embedded challenges for Black Americans. Black people have been integral to the evolution of Boston for almost 350 years, and yet many of us are incessantly traumatized by violence, poverty, and incarceration. This kind of painful intergenerational trauma can create significant inequities in health outcomes, educational attainment, and economic opportunity. And that is why these will be the focus areas of our Congressional Black Caucus fly-in. We'll be doing a town hall to end push-out, to address the criminalization and push-out of black girls in our schools. We'll be doing an economic justice town hall, and we will also be addressing the epidemic of mass incarceration and going behind the wall of MCI Norfolk. Neighborhoods like Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan still experience a disproportionate amount of the violence, and the black home ownership rate is only 30%, while the overall home ownership rate in our region is 64%. We cannot put an end to systemic injustices if those closest to the pain aren't closest to the power driving and informing our policy making. So as we continue to tour around the country examining the state of Black America, we will continue to shine a light on our communities that have been historically ignored and underserved. And we will seek justice for those who have suffered at the hands of racist, xenophobic, and discriminatory systems. So once again, I thank you all for being here, and now we'll turn it over to our fearless leader, CBC Chairwoman Karen Bass, the representative for California's 37th District and the first Black woman in history to serve as the Speaker of the California Assembly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I am certainly honored to be here this evening. And let me just say, as the Congresswoman laid out, there are so many challenges that are faced, that African Americans face. But I will have to say that in all of the challenges that we've faced over all of these years, we have managed not just to survive, but to thrive. And I think the evidence of that thriving is the leadership that you pointed out in this city. And you should know that in Washington, D.C., we are extremely proud of your representative here, Ayanna Pressley. She has been in D.C. for barely a year, I guess January of this year, and you should know that from the moment she arrived and was sworn in, she has absolutely made a difference. And I know that you have one of the distinctions of having introduced more legislation than just about anybody in the Congress, and that's no small matter when you first come into the Congress to be able to achieve that, and not just legislation, but legislation about issues that are really significant to our community. So I'm very proud to be here. The Congressional Black Caucus, you should know, we've had 55 members. We had the tragedy this year of losing one of our members. So we are 54 strong, and we also have significant amount of leadership in the Congress. We are represented on the highest levels, and with us today is Representative Barbara Lee, who you'll hear from in a minute, and she has the distinction of being the highest ranking African American woman in the House of Representatives, period. So she serves as the vice chair of the Steering and Policy Committee, which sets the policy for the House of Representatives. CBC members chair full committees, which is a huge deal. 4 members of the CBC chair full committees, 28 members chair subcommittees, and so it's not just that it's 54 members, but it's the significant role that we play. And so what we are doing from last year and also this year is we're going around the country and we are taking members of the Congressional Black Caucus, we call them fly-ins, we go to different cities. It's an opportunity for us to engage with the population in different cities, to see the problems and the issues, and the idea that this is the very first time that members of the caucus have come to Boston, I think is very significant. But we do this because, you know, if you watch TV, you don't think we do anything except for obsess over, you know, his name, 45 we refer to him in Los Angeles. But you think that's all we do, and you also think that Democrats and Republicans never get together and work on anything. So part of us going around to different cities is to talk about the very specific work and accomplishments of the Congressional Black Caucus. In a few weeks, we're going to have a summit because 2020 is a critical year, not just because of the election, but also because of the census. And so the Congressional Black Caucus is calling on black leaders from around the country to come to DC on February 3rd, February 4th. Your representative will fill you in on that as we develop it. So thank you very much. Thank you for doing this. Proud to be here in Boston, and I'm glad it's not snowing.
They all asked about that. Congresswoman Gwen is the representative for Wisconsin's 4th Congressional District and the first Black woman elected to Congress from the state of Wisconsin. Yeah, African American, period. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Representative Pressley, and I couldn't resist coming to this particular fly-in because of the topics that are being dealt with. I think it has been very prescient of your Congresswoman to really take a deep dive into the issues that concern African Americans at all levels, every socioeconomic group in Black America. One is criminal justice. African Americans want criminal justice reform and justice and fairness for African Americans. I hail from Wisconsin, which has, unfortunately, it's the highest rate of incarceration of African American men in the country. And so I am very eager to sit down with a group of African American men, with our panelists, to try to get some insights and ideas about how to move forward out of this particular malaise. And certainly the push out of African American women out of our educational systems is not only a draconian problem for those women, but you can just forget about a family if we don't save girls. And so I am so pleased that you have called us here for this weekend, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
I'm not done. I'm a member of the Committee on Ways and Means. I think it's really important to point out that all of us have various different backgrounds with the same goals, and I am a member of the Ways and Means Committee. And one of the things that I'm working on with regard to your economic justice is a great expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. You know, as Reverend Barber and Reverend Theo Harris, co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, have pointed out, it's not just people on welfare, but it's 140 million Americans. Almost half of Americans are hanging on by the hair of their chinny chin chin. And so it is really important to figure out how to bring some economic equity to our community and not just provide $1.4 trillion in tax cuts. So thank you again.
Right. Thank you. That's
for your
important point that needs to be
that's why I had to drag myself back.
We share this thing. You don't have to drag anything. And as the chair was speaking about Barbara Lee, and we often say Barbara Lee speaks for me, right? You know, she is our leader and a staunch champion for peace and diplomacy, to repeal the Hyde Act for reproductive justice and freedom, and to address one of the main issues that we're looking to address during this CBC fly-in, and again, that is mass incarceration. African Americans make up 31% of the U.S. population, but nearly 56% of the population, of our incarcerated population. And so I'm pleased to invite Barbara Lee, the representative for California's 13th Congressional District. She says it's the wokest district in the country. Boston, I'm hoping we can give her some competition. And again, the only Black woman in Democratic leadership, serving as co-chair of the Policy and Steering Committee.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank you, Congresswoman Pressley, for that kind introduction, but also for your phenomenal leadership fighting for the issues that the people of Massachusetts 7 care about, but also in terms of making sure that the entire country understands what our priorities should be as it relates to the African American community. Of course, you know that Congresswoman Pressley is a trailblazer, and she's a true progressive shero, and she's an accomplished and savvy legislator. So it's been really a pleasure to work with her now in Congress. We worked together prior to her coming to Congress, and so she has hit the ground running, and she's delivering on her priorities as a member of Congress. And I have to say, my son, and it's really good to be back here, my son attended Boston University for several years, and I see the progress, and I see what your leadership has brought to this great city. So congratulations to you. And also to our incredible chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, our chairperson, Karen Bass. Karen has such a powerful presence in Congress and in her district, and her leadership as our chair of the CBC has just been phenomenal. She works day in and day out to make sure that we take the Congressional Black Caucus to the people, because we know that it's the people who guide us and who set the agenda really for the entire country and especially for Black America. So thank you, Congresswoman. Man, she's everywhere. I think I've been to everyone's district here, but she's been to twice as many, and so she's been quite a shero in this. And so we all know that these are turbulent times, and I wanted to just mention just a couple of things in terms of just racial and economic inequality. Of course, last year we observed the solemn 400-year commemoration of enslaved Africans arriving on our shores. And while we've made progress, we all know that slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and institutional racism have made the state of Black America unequal, and we must continue to work to address these systemic barriers and inequalities head on. And one of I think the real important aspects of Congresswoman Pressley's leadership is that when you look at her bills and what her priorities are on every issue, she's not tinkering around the edges. She's going straight to the systemic and institutional issues that we have to address in this country. She's standing up like the Congressional Black Caucus is to institutional racism and hate, ensuring economic prosperity is shared by all, and really insisting that our children and grandchildren grow up in a world that's more fair and just. Congresswoman Pressley visited my district several months ago, and we went into a prison, and we talked to women, and we learned a lot during that visit, but also we recognized that we had to take what we learned in that prison and take it back to Washington, D.C. And because of her leadership and the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus, we were able to do two things. I just want to mention what we did at the Appropriations Committee. I serve on the Appropriations Committee with Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. We learned that there has not been any data nor report on women in prison since 2000. Okay, since 2000. So we were able, in the Appropriations Committee, because of these members here and Congresswoman Pressley, we were able to direct the Department of Justice to come up with new data and a new report on the status of women in prison. Also, we were able, and this is a drop in the bucket, but we were able to add $75 million to our budget to look at alternatives to incarceration. And so just out of these few months, we've been able to take some steps, not enough, but some major steps, I think, in the right direction to begin to address this whole criminal justice system at its core. And that is extremely important, because when you look at what is taking place now in terms of mass incarceration, when you look at the fact that 40% of African American kids in preschool are being expelled. Preschool kids. This is our kids being expelled. How do you expel kids in preschool? And so by the time they're in elementary school, by the time they're 5 or 6, they don't even have a head start. They can't. And so that begins this cycle, this pipeline to prison. And so we've got to crack that pipeline. And the Congressional Black Caucus has been and will continue to fight to do that. And finally, let me just say, when it comes to looking at the issues around poverty and income inequality, when you look at what is taking place in the African American community in terms of income inequality, you have to look at the wealth gap, and you have to look at racial inequality also. Because if we only deal with economic inequality and don't address race as a factor, then we'll never be able to address liberty and justice and economic fairness for all. And so I just want to thank you, Congresswoman Pressley, for giving us an opportunity to come to Boston to your on this historic visit, but also just say, we share many similarities. Now, I'm telling my district that your district is our sister district, because so many of the issues are very much the same, like in all of our districts, but I'm going to still be your sister. So thank you all again. Thanks for inviting us here.
representative for New Jersey's 12th Congressional District and the first Black woman to serve as majority leader of the New Jersey General Assembly. Again, so many trailblazers and history makers on the stage, and I'm so grateful for her voice and her leadership. I hope she'll speak about the caucus that she's a founder of and co-chair, and the work that we're doing together on push out as well. Maybe not right this moment, but we'll be talking about that throughout the weekend. So, all right.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here in historic Boston with a history maker. This is my little sister. Karen Bass decided that each of us was going to have a little sister when we had our new Congress. So this is mine, and we keep in touch. So I think what I want you to see here is the diversity of our interests and the diversity of our experience. So you have people who are up here who serve on oversight and government reform, on the judiciary, on ways and means, on budget and appropriations, on homeland security, foreign affairs. So we get to work in these diverse realms, but we bring the uniqueness of our being Black and female to those enterprises. So we try to see things through those lenses, because for too often and too long, that unique intersection of being Black and female has just not been at the center of anyone's attention. So we created a caucus on the Congressional Caucus on Black women and girls. This is the first in the history of the caucus, and it's to look at those things. An exciting part about being here is that we're going to discuss diverse areas. So we'll be listening and learning as well as sharing, whether or not it's behind the wall with criminal justice reform, or it's with entrepreneurs on economic opportunities and barriers and opportunities, whether or not it's going to be education, the impact of the miseducation of our children from the very youngest all the way through their educational experience and how that impacts their life thereafter. We're also going to talk about unique things like we have investment firms, we have wealth firms that will invest endowment money. And I've worked on that issue with Princeton University, and I want my sisters up here to ask their major universities in their districts, who are you investing your money with? Because that's who we are also. We're not stuck in any one category. The value that African Americans have brought to this country beyond building it is that we make it work, we make it run, and we make it efficient and effective for everyone. We as sisters up here who happen to be members of Congress are just going to make sure that the return on the investment makes sense. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
All right. And now Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District and the first Somali American member of Congress, and my beloved sister.
Well, thank you, Pressley. I'm really delighted to be here. It's an honor, and I remember when Chairwoman Bass was talking about this vision of us going into each other's districts, having a conversation with our constituents. I thought it was a very fascinating idea, because oftentimes the Black Caucus and its achievements, it's truly the hidden figures, right? We don't often talk about the accomplishments that the Congressional Black Caucus has made, the impact it's made in this country, and how it's shaped many of the policies that have garnered progress in this country. We also don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about how we have turned many of our challenges into opportunities. And it is quite humbling to be part of this first historic visit with historical figures, and to get an opportunity to return a favor to Ayanna. She visited my district as part of the fly-in in Minnesota's 5th back in August. My district and my state is one of the worst places to live as a Black person. The disparities are so stark. Whether it is economic, whether it is in regards to incarceration, whether it is home ownership, in education, in every single aspect, we are lacking in Minnesota. Even though we are one of the greatest states for every single thing, for everyone else, except for Black people. And we got an opportunity to have many of the conversations we'll be having here in Boston and in Massachusetts 7th. And what I noticed in our visit with Ayanna is that when she says that those closest to the pain need to be closest to power, this is not a statement of value. This is something that she puts into practice. We had an opportunity to visit a juvenile center in my district, and as the young kids who were formerly incarcerated in that detention center gathered to have a conversation with us about their interaction with our criminal justice system, I remember Ayanna leaning in and telling them that we represented them. They were our bosses, and we needed them to tell us what we needed to do on their behalf. And it was their job to pay attention and give us a report card on whether we were being successful. And so I know that she does that here in her district. And one of the policies that we are working on together, the three of us, the Push Out Act, comes out of those conversations. It comes out of the roundtables, the lunch-ins, the conversations she's had with many young women across the country in listening to how the disciplinary discriminations in their schools have led them to be pushed out from our education system, and what it will take for us to systematically end this injustice. And so I am just delighted to have the opportunity to be in community, to know that we are here in this historic time, working together to get at the core issues that are contributing to the state of Black people in this country, look at the opportunities that exist, and finally enhance the thriving that we've been talking about, so that we can have full equality for everyone in this country.
So we're happy to answer any questions, if there are any. Again, thank you for joining us.
I just had a question for Congresswoman Lee. The last point you made was about, and I'm not sure I have it correct, but can you expand a little bit more on what you meant when you said you can't address income inequity without addressing racial equality in more concrete terms?
Sure. When you look at,
Without addressing race.
yeah. There's given the history of African Americans in this country, we have to recognize that race is a factor in every part of our lives, and every institution and every policy. And so when you look at income inequality, and when you look at the disproportionate numbers of African Americans, for example, living below the poverty line, when you look at the disproportionate numbers of African American children being expelled from school, when you look at the disproportionate numbers of African Americans who are homeless, when you look at the disproportionate numbers of African Americans who lost their homes during the subprime crisis, when you look at all of these issues, then you have to say, what is this that creates these disparities? Race is a factor in all of these disparities.
I just want to address it just a little bit, to the extent that Congresswoman Pressley talked about the disparity in housing, for example. We've had institutional racism. It's not just someone just, shouting out the N-word or denying you a job. I mean, we've had whole institutions like the FHA that deliberately provided the opportunities and mortgages to the white population and forbade those sorts of mortgages and loans to go into African American sort of areas. We talk about environmental justice. We talk about areas where low income, where poor people of color live. They live in toxic areas. So there are institutional racism that no matter how hard you work, there are legacy sorts of benefits that the majority population has received, where there was a professor, as a matter of fact, was a professor years ago right here at Harvard who wrote a book called The Black Power Imperative. And it just talked about no matter how hard black people work, they would never, ever, 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 ever be able to catch up economically unless we addressed some of the systemic and institutional racism. Thank you for that great question.
Yes, I'm grateful for it as well, and I would just add that, since we are at an academic institution, African Americans represent the highest private loan borrowers of student loans, and they also have the highest rate of default. Now, why are they the greatest borrowers? Because they don't have generational wealth. So again, because of structural racism and institutionalized racism, we see these great inequities that address other outcomes. The point that I made about within that 3-mile radius, that life expectancy drops by 30 years from Cambridge to Roxbury, and median household income by $50,000. I think a main driver of that is the fact that Black Boston bus riders have to ride an additional 64 hours a year. They are riding longer, they are waiting longer, they are transferring longer. Transit is a social and economic justice issue. This is about one's ability to get to a job on time, to get to school on time, to get to child care on time. And so that is why I've established this Future of Transportation Caucus. I know it's something that we don't often discuss on the federal level, but that is only because the federal funding formula is antiquated and contributing to these inequities and these disparities. These inequities and disparities along economics, health, education, they exist in many, I believe, because transportation here is not affordable, accessible, rapid, and reliable. And the federal funding formula is antiquated, contributing to these inequities because it is only funding highways, roads, and bridges. Now I want to prioritize maintenance, but we need to prioritize multimodal federal investment, and which is why I've established this Future of Transportation Caucus, which will center equity, accessibility, sustainability, and connectivity. So we can't do this work in a silo. We have to approach this work with an intersectional lens, with an intersectional legislative lens, because all of these issues are connected. But we have a $1.6 trillion student debt crisis. And I want to thank Representative Omar for her leadership and the legislation that she's put forward to address this chokehold, which will limit the promise of this Commonwealth in our country, because our young people are making decisions about what to major in and what jobs to pursue based on the debt that they know will be a permanent albatross in their life. And that burden is disproportionately borne by Black students. And in that we are in an academic institution, I could not say that. And then finally, because I see Siddiqui here, and Siddiqui, we were talking about a number of historic firsts that have recently occurred here in Boston. And thanks to the advocacy of our brother warrior who we just laid to rest yesterday, and Siddiqui Cambone. We recently renamed in Roxbury, Dudley Square, Nubian Square.
Yeah.
And you will all be visiting there and patronizing the businesses.
Congresswoman Pressley, being the first black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts and bringing the CBC here for the first time, what does it mean to you, and how much of a goal was it for you to bring this group here?
Yeah.
We came running.
Yeah, it wasn't, again, Chairwoman Bass, this was her vision, because, you know, we are all working hard to legislate, to disrupt and improve these disparate and unjust outcomes. And we also believe in transparency and being accountable to the people that we represent. And we are doing incredible work. People don't know the things that the Congressional Black Caucus has stopped. They don't know the things that we prevented from happening, right? So there's already a tsunami of hurt disproportionately being borne by black folks, and we do everything we can to mitigate that. But there are threats that are incoming that we stave off. And so it's an opportunity for us to be transparent, to be accountable, and even to be celebratory about the things that we have accomplished, and make sure that people know that there are resources available to them. This caucus fights very hard to secure grant funding and things like that, and so many organizations don't even know that they're eligible and pursue this funding. So this is as much educational and informative. It's a two-way conversation, you know, and it means everything. I mean, I'm trying to keep it together up here because, you know, I have these moments when I'm sitting at a Congressional Black Caucus weekly lunch, and I'm breaking bread with Barbara Lee and John Lewis and Maxine Waters and all the people on this stage. And, you know, it is humbling to break bread with them. It is an honor to serve with them, to legislate with them. And I just feel tremendously grateful.
Let me say something about your question, though, in terms of inviting us and getting us here. There was very little effort in getting us here for a number of reasons. Number one is that she's been an incredible leader from the day she stepped foot. And we need you all to know up here how much we respect having her with us, engaging in the war that does exist for equality and equity. And so we're here to show you all that we have her back, you know, and we expect you to have her.
We have time for one more question.
I apologize if this is a tired question, but you did mention having her back, but the CBC did not endorse Congresswoman Pressley and instead endorsed the incumbent. I was wondering if somebody could talk a little bit about that decision and how the relationship has been.
Yes,
since
let me just say that one thing that a lot of people don't realize is there's 4 separate organizations called the Congressional Black Caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus that's being represented up here is the part of us that are in Congress. There is a Congressional Black Caucus Political Action Committee that does endorsements of candidates. There's the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, that is the nonprofit arm that does the annual legislative conference. Then there's the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. The Congressional Black Caucus PAC did choose to make another endorsement. That's not representative of the entire Congressional Black Caucus, but what you need to know is that the day she won, everybody embraced her. And I don't think, if you don't mind me speaking for you, I don't think we missed a beat, and I don't think she missed a beat. And I remember when I met you, which was, you weren't sworn in yet, but you had been elected, and she came to a lunch, and everybody was absolutely thrilled to say not only do we have a new member of the Congressional Black Caucus, but we have the first African-American woman elected from the state of Massachusetts.
Final question, right back here.
Can I ask you a question about the People's Justice Guarantee?
Hold on, can you wait a little bit, because you asked one. Go ahead.
Somewhat a question, but actually, I'm here about a mission. I hear you talk about the economy. My name is Siddiqui Cambone. I'm very familiar with the senator. Is that a prediction? Anyhow, Congresswoman Pressley and a lot of work that she does. The primary reason why I'm here tonight is that back in 1999, and we all know that Dr. King's, the anniversary of his birth is coming up. And so essentially, what happens in 1999, well, we know about the assassination in 1968, what have you, and they said it was James Earl Ray, and Mrs. King and her family went and visited James Earl Ray and came out convinced that he was not the assassin, and they filed a civil suit, and there was a trial in Memphis, Tennessee, and essentially what happened that after the jury came back with a verdict that Dr. King was the victim of a conspiracy by agencies of the United States government in terms of assassination. So since that time, our organization, since 2000, we've been reaching out to various presidents and the last couple of years to the Black Caucus, saying that the bottom line is that it's an injustice because we do all these things to honor Dr. King, but it's an injustice when the bottom line is that his assassins have not been brought to justice. Now what is the injustice is the fact that we know who did it. With the trial, there's a transcript. I'm gonna give each of you, hopefully, I'm just doing this because of the fact since 2000 we've been sending letters and reaching out, hoping that someone is going to do something about the fact that the perpetrators still exist and that we have quote unquote leadership in our community all across the country who know this, but they appear seemingly to be afraid of it. So I would hope that, so I'm gonna give you this material because I'm not gonna prolong this, that you can go, anyone here, you can go to a website, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Assassination Trial Transcript, and it tells you everything, including who the assassin was, a white police lieutenant in Memphis. And so for the life of me, see, I don't celebrate the legacy of Dr. King because I don't feel that I have the right to do that because of the fact that we know that his killers are still out there. You know, Israelis, I'm not gonna prolong this, but Israelis are still pursuing Nazis out here that are 100 years old. And so I'm gonna give this material and hope that this will be a mission of the caucus to pursue this. I'll close with this.
We would love that if you'll just, we thank you for raising the issue, for your research on this. This is a member of my staff, okay?
That's okay.
Because we don't want to respond to something and not be fully
I
informed.
understand.
And you've done great, research on this, so we would like to get the education ourselves and then
Okay, that would be
respond.
helpful.
Okay?
Former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney filed a bill some years ago because there's evidence that has been sealed until 2027, and nothing happened. So
Okay.
I would hope that the caucus will embrace this in the spirit of really honoring Dr. King and his family.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a last one from Tim, and then we're gonna close things.
For your People's Justice Guarantee, you've had district attorneys, or a district attorney here in Massachusetts say that your proposals will lead to more crime, a police chief saying it will enable bad behavior. As far as that type of response here in your state to your proposals in the People's Justice Guarantee, how do you respond to that criticism from people basically in your backyard and maybe even your district?
Oh, well, I'm happy to tell the other side of that story, which is that our Suffolk County District Attorney was one of the architects of the People's Justice Guarantee resolution.
And she's also received some pushback recently.
That's okay. We are offering something that has never been heard of before, and that is a transformative, radical reimagining of the criminal legal system. And so when people have never seen or heard of something, it will make them uncomfortable. I have no qualms about making people uncomfortable in the name of progress or justice. I do not believe that mass incarceration has made any of us safer. And so the 1994 crime bill, which incentivized mass incarceration, I believe that with the People's Justice Guarantee resolution, that we can incentivize mass decarceration by decriminalizing poverty and low-level offenses. My father, who battled substance abuse disorder and opioid addiction, was in and out of the criminal legal system. He was only able to get sober while incarcerated. My father committed crimes to support his addiction. He committed crimes. He was not a criminal. His disease should not have been criminalized. What my father deserved, like millions of Americans who were suffering similarly, was on-demand, culturally competent treatment to address the traumas that led him to self-medicate through addiction. Now my father, because at the time we were still investing in education and there was access to Pell Grants, all those things have been gutted. attained 2 advanced degrees while he was incarcerated, and went on to become a professor of journalism and a published author.
Wow.
Now, thankfully, we are not missing out on the brilliant contributions that he has had to make to this society. But there are millions that are dying on the vine. Why, in a commonwealth, we don't have the death penalty, but we have a life sentences without parole? That might as well be the death penalty. We should be considering compassionate release. So I want a criminal legal system that centers 5 principles: dignity, humanity, shared power, safety, and equality. And I believe that it is possible. Why are we arresting people for fare evasion? Let me be clear. How could I, as a black woman, stand up here and be an advocate for crimes and violence when black people disproportionately represent the highest victimization of crime? So nobody wakes up and wants to be a victim, and I don't believe anybody wakes up and wants to be a perpetrator. And I do not believe that mass incarceration has made anyone safer. I believe through the People's Justice Guarantee Resolution that we can get to 80% plus decarceration by not criminalizing people that are battling diseases, by not criminalizing homelessness. When you are ticketing, fining, or arresting a person experiencing homelessness for skipping a turnstile so that they can get to a shelter in time for curfew, there is no place for that in a just society. So I'm okay with whomever is uncomfortable.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for taking a lot of the Congresswoman's time. So